Okay, so we're talking about, again, the theme for the year is finding our footing. That relates to our positioning in the community and as a congregation, both looking at where we are in our growth and also where we are in the community so that we can help people where we find them. And that's important. The way we see ourselves is important. The way the community sees us is important. And it's not the most important thing, but it is important. And so we try our best to have a good reputation, try our best to put ourselves in the right positions so that we can help as many as possible. And that positioning idea is something that's really, it's difficult sometimes to figure out how to do that. But it is important, and I think it's a matter of just some self-awareness in our own parts and finding the needs that are in the community. And we're also then talking about in January through March, related to finding our place, finding our footing, is we've been talking about the pursuit of God. And that's what we're primarily been focusing on, and we're looking at, related to that, in February, we're looking at standing firm in the presence of God, or in Christ's presence. So this is how we've been talking about spiritual growth. We've been talking about the spiritual warfare. We're talking about standing firm in Christ's presence and what that means as far as how we can control our own selves and how we can present ourselves to the community around us. And this week, we're looking at the idea of holiness. Growing in holiness. And this is going to come through God revealing himself. And last week, the emphasis was on the holiness of God and how we should interact with him and recognize him in our lives. So God is present in our lives, and we recognize that. And that's going to help us in the challenges and difficulties that we face. But related to that, then, we're going to the next shift, I guess, from there is that we're talking about how we're going to grow in holiness based upon that presence. So God is present in our lives, and it should cause some reaction in us so that we become more and more holy, and that's the idea. So, 1 Peter says, "Be holy, for I am holy." God said that in the book of Leviticus many times, that he talks about his own holiness. God did all these different things for the Israelites to create holiness among them and among the nations so that they would stand out. And there's certainly application for us that we have to ask ourselves, if people look at us, do they see anything different? And our behavior is the only thing that can define that, right? It's not our thoughts, it's not our attitudes, although that is somewhat, it leads to behaviors, but if our behavior is not different from the world, then there's no way they can see a difference, and there should be a difference. And so that's going to relate to that, to our discussion, hopefully, this week. And the idea from Exodus 24 all the way through Leviticus 2, the general idea is that God's holiness is shown. It gives details, instructions on exactly what he expects from us, or what he expected from the Israelites, and then carries over for us as well to some degree, as far as what he wants to see from his people. He gave instructions on approaching him through the sacrificial offerings, which we'll talk a little bit about today. And as the Israelites followed these instructions, they grew in understanding God's holiness. And that's one of the reasons that we have details and instructions, is because that teaches us and trains us to be the kind of people that God wants. And that God could have, I suppose, he could have simply said, just be good to each other. And then that would be the whole New Testament if he wanted to be that way. But he didn't. He gave us some specific things. And part of those specifications relates to us growing and learning to trust him and do things his way, which is part of the lessons that we need. So recognizing God's holiness and how we respond to it relates everything to our attitudes, our thinking, and our activities, how we treat one another, that kind of thing. Okay, so looking at the section from Exodus 25 through 25 through 31. We have the tabernacle. That's the design for the tabernacle is given. He gave them design for the furnishings, for the priestly garments, and he did that through Moses, of course. He also gave them, he told them that they needed to have skilled craftsmanship, and they needed to have quality materials. This is all related to his glory. So it wasn't just thrown together. It was put together precisely. And incidentally, how did they know the pattern for how to build the tabernacle and all that stuff? Right. God gave it to Moses. In fact, when he was on the mount, he saw it. And so now he's able to transfer that to Israel, and God made sure all the details were there. Then 32 through 34, we have the rebellion with the golden calf. That's when Moses is up getting the 10 Commandments written on stone from God, spending 40 days and 40 nights without eating or drinking. And he's doing what he can to get everything from God. And then he comes down. God says, you need to go down there and figure out what's going on, or see what's going on. And on the way down, you could hear lots of noise, and it wasn't a battle or anything like that. It was them having fun and dancing and partying and all this. So while he was there, they had built this golden calf that Aaron built. They came to him and said, we hadn't seen Moses in a while, and so tell us what we need to do, right? And so Aaron said, they said we need to worship. We need a God. And Aaron said, okay, just take off your rings and earrings and give them to me. And so he melted it down and fashioned a calf out of gold. And interestingly, when Moses confronted Aaron, he said, "What's going on here?" And remember what Aaron said as far as what happened? Yeah, they wanted a god, so I collected all this stuff and threw it in the fire, and out came this calf. I'm sure that's exactly how it happened, but he's blaming the Israelites. And maybe even God, because who else would do that if you could throw it into the fire and out pops a calf? Because the calf certainly wasn't going to do that to itself. But whose fault was it that they were doing those things? It was Aaron's. To some degree, he had control. He could have said, you know what, let's give him some time to get back. But he didn't. He was probably afraid of them. And that's right. He was a priest, so he's a high priest. And it's not like they didn't know that going up. Moses had already written down the law for them, but when he went up, when Moses went up the mountain, God put it on the tablets, wrote it with his finger, and sent him back down with them, or at least the 10 Commandments. So they already had the law. They knew what they should be doing, what they should not be doing, but Aaron didn't enforce it. Yeah. Right. Oh yeah. Yeah. First sign of trouble, he's like, yeah, I don't know what y'all are going to do, but here, just do what you want. It's amazing. It says something about why Moses was chosen to be leader, not Aaron. But it is interesting that all these things happen like that. But then God renewed the covenant, and he's proving his uncompromising holiness. What happened when Moses came down the hill, or came down the mountain? Remember what he did? Yeah, that's true. He dropped the stones and they broke, so he had to go get them again, another 40 days. What else did he do to the calf? He ground it up into powder and put it in the water and made the Israelites drink it. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he said, okay, everyone who stands with God, come to me. And so Levites came to him, and he said, turn around and go in and kill everybody you see. And so how many people died that day? About 3,000. A bunch. 3,000 people died because they broke the law, and they didn't want to follow God. And that was a big deal. There were, it's percentage-wise, it wasn't that many percentage, but as far when you look at 1 million to 2 million people, 3,000 is not that big, but it's still 3,000 people that were killed, and they were killed by the Levites. And so they were really enforcing what God designed. It probably could be the case that these ones that decided to kill all of them, or to follow God's directions about it, didn't really want to participate in it to begin with. It doesn't say, but there is some vindication here, I guess, or judgment against these people, obviously, because they went and killed all of them. And then God showed His glory to Moses, also in this section. So remember what He did with that? Moses said, "Let me see your glory." How did He show His glory to Moses? Yeah. Said, "You can't see me face to face," but what did He do? Sorry? Yes, that's right. He said, "You can see me from behind." So He passed over and put His hand over him and allowed him to see as he passed, but not see him face to face. And don't ask me if this is literally God or representation of God. I have no idea, but it seems to indicate this is God. So this shows it's an interesting idea. Why would Moses request to see God? Curiosity, yeah, I'd be curious too. He's about to undertake a huge task, or he's undertaking a huge task, and he wanted to be sure, right? So it's a confidence builder, for one, also, and it's perfectly normal and natural for us to want evidence. And even though we may believe in God, there's some times where we look around and think, I need to prove this again to myself, right? I need to shore up why I believe. And there are many, many reasons. Incidentally, when we talked about last week a lot about seeing God in our lives, right? We talked about that a lot. And that's a good thing to do. We look at our past, we can see God. We look at our future, we can see God because we have the promises. So that tells us by faith that we can also see God in the present, although we really don't know how God is acting right now for the most part. We do know that we can count on Him and different things like this, but we're kind of in a blind spot related to Him. So that's perfectly fine, though, for us to think about God's presence and to see that as evidence for us that we believe in God. But that really, as far as convincing an unbeliever, is not an adequate argument, because they believe in chance. If you believe in chance, is there such a thing as chance? Yes. Jesus said in the parable of the Good Samaritan, said, by chance a certain priest walked by. And so the idea of chance is there. So you can explain a lot of things by, well, there's just things that work out, and human nature, all kinds of things can be explanations. So the evidence that God is real is one thing for a believer. It's shoring up what we already know to be the case. But for an unbeliever, it's not really appropriate or adequate to say, well, he's there, I can just see him at work in my life. That's really not an adequate way to explain that. And the reason is because, do good things happen to Hindus? Of course they do. What about atheists? Of course they do. So is that evidence that God is in their life if He's working through an atheist? For us it might be, but for them it's not. It just happens to everyone. So that's kind of the fortunes of how things work. That's right. So it's not evidence to them that, oh, this is God. But although it is supporting for us, it supports us. And so anyway, I know it's a different topic, but it is. I think it's important to recognize that. And then we have Exodus 35 through 40, the tabernacles, the furnishings, priestly garments. They're constructed according to God's design, gave him a dwelling place for his glory among his people. And remember, where in the tabernacle was God's throne, so to speak, in the holiest of holies, right on top of the Ark of the Covenant, in between the two cherubim, and facing each other. And that's where God dwelt, in the way that they saw that in the temple. And that was the reason that the only one person could go in once a year. It was simply by necessity, so that he can make atonement for the people of Israel, for all of Israel. And he had to make sacrifices for himself before he could even go in, because you don't just approach God anytime you want, because of his holiness. Then we have in Leviticus 1 and 2, we have offerings that were described. It actually continues on into chapter 3, and the rest of the book of Leviticus is about the way that the Levites perform the functions of priesthood and things like that. So this is re-emphasizing to them holiness. That's the idea. All the way through Exodus and everywhere, God is showing that he is holy, that he is unique, he's set apart, he's different. There's nothing that is like him. And we need to recognize that idea. So let's think about some questions here. Why does God provide such detailed instructions for the design of the tabernacle and its furnishings? And what does it reveal about his character? He definitely is detailed and specific. Yeah. So that tells us something about him, as he's meticulous. And what else does it say? Okay. He has a pattern. We recognize that we do things his way and not our way. That's a good point. Is that what you said? It also shows that he has specific ideas, of course, for himself, what he wants. And the question we ought to ask is, how do we know what pleases God? And that's one of the things that I try to help people see when having Bible studies is it doesn't matter what we think pleases God. It doesn't matter, there are people in the religious world that say it doesn't matter what you do as long as you want to please God, as long as you're trying, as long as you love him, and you're doing it to please him, then he's going to be fine with it, because who would turn down a gift, right? So if I'm going to give you a gift, it's rude in our culture for you to look at a gift that I give you and say, yeah, I don't think I want that. You can keep that. It's okay. That's rude. It's not rude with God, though. Why is that? That's right. Right. He demands the best from us. And he's the one who determines what best is, incidentally. So that's a very important idea. It's an important concept. Do we have any evidence in the Bible that shows us that God will reject even a free will offering to him? Nadab and Abihu is a great example of that. We'll talk about that for sure next week. But that is, remember, what did they offer him? Strange fire. Yeah, we don't know what that was, except we don't know if it was the source or the stuff that was burning. I don't know. But it was something that he did not require. And when they burned it, they got burned. They were killed because of that. So that's an example. That's an extreme example, but it is an example. There are other places we can see in the Bible where even, for example, in the book of Leviticus, we'll see that when God, he would receive and he would accept free will offerings, which that is an offering that's just, it's not required. It's just that people decided they wanted to give a gift to God because they love God and they want to give something. Maybe they're celebrating something or whatever, but they're giving a gift to God, okay? Even that, he is telling them, this, if you're going to bring me a free will offering, this is exactly what I want for it. So he's always been that way. And when we see that God is demanding, it makes us recognize that he is different than us. Another reason why God can make demands of what we give him is because we're not him, right? We're not God. A lot of times we get to thinking that we're on the level with God, and we're not. So, Harry, I think that is playing for everybody to hear. So we need to recognize that God is not one who is like us. We have to become like him, even though we're made in his image. There's no question about that. But we're thinking about God. He is unique and different, and we must be the kind of people who recognizes that he is above us and superior to us. Typically, when people create gods, they tend to make them like humans, right? They have weaknesses often. They have the same kind of characteristics and mannerisms to some degree. They have a lot of similarities. And when we look at God in the Bible, that's not who he is. He's not like us. We are like him, and we need to be more and more like him is the idea. It's a higher calling. But then we also run into this situation where God has, it's called anthropomorphism, where God is shown to have human characteristics. So we'll see the hand of God, or we'll see the back of God, or we'll see this or that about God. And these are things that are, for the best way to put it, is they're for our benefit, so we can have a connection with him and recognize him. I don't know if God has a form, so to speak. I have no idea. No one's ever seen God except Jesus, and he came to earth. So we don't know exactly how things work. I don't know if he's like a big cloud. I have no idea. But I know that he is different than we expect him to be. And so when we come to God, we need to recognize that. And he shows himself, though, as having human characteristics so that we can understand better what's being conveyed. That's the only way I can understand that. All right. Now in Exodus 33 and 34, this is when they're told to leave Sinai. And incidentally, they were at Sinai for a year. And then this is when Moses put his tent outside the camp in verse 7, far from the camp, and called it the tabernacle of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord went out to the tabernacle of meeting, which is outside the camp. And it says, so it was whenever Moses went out to the tabernacle that all the people rose, and each man stood at his tent door and watched Moses till he'd gone into the tabernacle. And it came to pass when Moses entered the tabernacle, the pillar of cloud descended and stood at the door of the tabernacle, and the Lord talked with Moses. And all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the tabernacle door, and all the people rose and worshipped, each man in his tent door. So there's a recognition that this is where God is. And the evidence of it was the tabernacle, and this is where Moses was. So the Lord spoke to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. He would return to the camp, but his servant Joshua the son of Nun, a young man, did not depart from the tabernacle. All right, when we're looking at this, how did seeing God's glory impact Moses? This is actually probably more related to verse 18. When he said, show me your glory. And he said, I will make my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before you. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But he said, you cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live. So this is where he is. Now, what do we see from context when he was speaking and spending time with God? What kind of an impact did that have on him? There was a physical one. What was that? Sorry? Okay, so he wanted to see God more fully, right? And there was also a physical one actually mentioned in the book of Hebrews. Yeah, his skin would actually glow when he spent time. You remember what did he do to keep the Israelites from, I guess, being afraid? He put a veil over his face, yeah, which was, especially for a man, completely uncommon. But he's covering his face because of this glow, and when the glow went away, he would uncover his face, and then the next time he spent time with God, he would have the same glow. And incidentally, that's why painters and stuff represents people in like Bible characters as having glowing faces because they assume that everyone glowed, but that wasn't common for sure. And that's where the halo came from. It was kind of a representation of that glow, but so it showed holiness, right? And that's the idea here, is God is showing through Moses holiness, and it's showing that he's different from the people because he spent time with God and they haven't been able to do that kind of thing. How should a glimpse of God's glory, so to speak, impact us? How does that kind of, whether it's the glow or how we decide to interact with God or with each other, how should that affect us? Okay, yeah, it would. It gives confidence that we know he's with us, and that should help with our interactions with each other and with other people, right? So if I know that God's going to be there for me, then what really do I have to worry about when I'm facing difficulties and challenges? And so we can do that because of challenges in our own selves or challenges that we're facing out in the world around us. Peace, yes. And when you think about this, that calm that comes from being with God, it's not that our faces glow, but should be some kind of difference in our behavior, right? Because the more we're with God, the more we become like God, and there should be seen a difference. That's the best way that I can explain contextually from this section what Moses endured, what he had happen to him, how it should apply to us. What is the difference between our ability to interact with God and Moses' ability with interaction? That may be a little vague. Okay, you might say the cloud is Jesus. What kind of restrictions did Moses have interacting with God? Right, you couldn't see him. Sorry? Well, that's true, yeah. And what were you saying? All right, God did speak with him face to face like he would a friend. True. So we don't speak with God the same way that Moses did. We're also obviously we're not called to leading the Israelites out anywhere, but generally speaking, though, what about the quote unquote the glow that he had? How's that different from what we have? This is what the book of Hebrews actually is talking about when it talks about that. Sure, yeah. So we have an inward glow, so to speak, yeah. No doubt. How does that differ, how does that differ from what Moses had? I'm not talking about whether it's physically or inside. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. They should be able to, right? Yeah. Yeah. They may not understand the difference, but they'll see it. Yeah, that's true. And how long did it last with Moses? I'm not looking for specific time frame, but it didn't last until the next meeting, did it? No, because he took the veil off when the glow quit. So the difference related to that, to the quote-unquote glow, is Moses had specific times that he spent with God, where God would call him to him, and they would spend time together. With Christians, when is the opportunity for us to approach God? Do we have to wait for an invitation? No, in fact, we're told in the book of Hebrews that we should come boldly to the throne of grace. We don't have to wait for God to send us a special invitation to approach him. We're supposed to be with him all the time, and we can be all the time. And that means that when Moses was not with God, that's when the glow began to fade, right? If we don't have that in our lives, the reason that we don't have that inward glow, so to speak, is because we're not spending time with God. And when we're spending time in the presence of God, and I don't mean that literally, obviously, but spiritually, we're in his word, we're thinking about him, we're praying, we're doing what we can, then if we're not in that presence, then the glow begins to fade. We stop acting as we should. We stop having the correct priorities. The idea of loving God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength begins to fade. The enthusiasm fades. And what tends to replace those things when we start losing that kind of presence with God? What tends to come in its place? We start seeing sin. We start seeing worldliness. Our attitudes begin to change. We start seeing bitterness and anger and all kinds of different things that come into our lives, that we start actually seeing more and more of who we used to be and less of who we should be. And that's an important idea. I realize that saying that it's a bit ethereal. It's one of these things where it's not something that can be nailed down very precisely, but putting God first in your heart is exactly what Jesus said is the first commandment, and the reason for that is everything else springs from there. And sometimes we want to make everything perfect and then approach God because he's holy. And while that is not necessarily a bad attitude to have, I want to make things right, it's God who makes them right. And so we have a completely different approach to God now than Moses did. And although we still should be working toward holiness. All right, let's see. Any other thoughts on that? In Exodus chapter 32, with the golden calf incident, this is question number 3. How does God's response to Israel's rebellion demonstrate his holiness? What aspects of his character does it reveal? What does it say about God, the way things have transpired from this? He's jealous, okay? Meaning what? He has no rivals and won't be on the same level with anyone or anything. We can understand this as humans. Have you ever been to I'm going to offend some people probably. Have you ever been to someone's house and they didn't ever have kids, but they have pets? And they treat their pets like children? Okay, that's one thing. Have you ever had them talk to your kids, and talk to you as if their pets are equal to your children? Have you ever heard that before? Is that offensive in any way? Of course it is. Dogs are not children. They're nothing the same. Now, I have no problem with loving a pet, but when you place an animal equal with a human, there's a problem. And we have to be careful with that. I'm not saying that we can't make comparisons or anything like that. Don't go too far with it. But if someone compared you with a chimpanzee, you're going to be insulted by that because you are nothing like a chimpanzee. You may have some characteristics. You're going to have fingers and toes. Oh, you're just a big chimp. Well, no, you're not. You're superior in many other ways. And so we would be absolutely right to say, stop comparing me to a monkey. I'm not a monkey. In the same way, there's no reason, we could say that God has some character flaw because he gets jealous. That has nothing to do with a character flaw. This has everything to do with his right place and recognition. There is nothing and no one that can come anywhere near who he is. And we have to recognize that. God demands that we recognize that. But don't we have the same kind of mentality? It's self-respect that is that an evil thing for us to demand that people see us as a human being and not as an ape? Of course, there's nothing wrong with that. That's exactly the same situation with God, except in a bigger level. So when we see that he's punishing these people, what does it say about him that all these people died? $3,000. He demands obedience. Yes. And does God have a right to make those kind of demands? Of course he does. He created us. He's superior to us. He knows everything. We have nothing in comparison to him, and he demands. Now, I'm thankful, and we all should be thankful that God is also a God of love, and so he will not do things that are outside of the nature of love. And some people say, well, there's a contrast here, right? How can God be loving God and still punish people? Is it loving for us to punish people, to put people in prison? Yes. We're loving that person because we're trying to make correction, but even the ones that we might put to death, who is it that we're considering when we're putting people in the electric chair, for example? Who's under consideration? It's not to help that person because he's obviously not going to be helped by being killed. Yeah.
When it comes to discussions like this that end up coming up of can we judge God, my mind always goes back to the discussion I had with the Bible teacher back in college, I think it was his father, had committed suicide when he was a young man. And the professor, in a conversation with him that I had, said, I struggled with that for most of my teenage life. Where is my dad going to be? Because he had struggled with some mental issues on top of that. And somebody finally sat him down and said, look, do you believe that God is perfect? And he said, yeah. He said, do you believe that God is the perfect judge? And he said, yeah. He said, then you don't need to worry about where your dad is. God has judged it perfectly, whether or not.
Yeah, that's true.
And it can be a stressor. We have to accept the fact that God has a different perspective than us. He has a better understanding of what we do.
That's right.
He's the perfect judge, no matter whether it's a reward or a punishment.
Yeah, that's right. He's the perfect judge, and we have to put our faith in that idea. So, coming back to the electric chair analogy, when we put a person to death, we're not doing it for him to learn a lesson because he's already. How can you learn from that? Who are we doing it for? For society, for the victims. There are other people involved. So, which one is it? Is it hatred or love? Yes. But there's physical punishment that comes, and we all recognize the legitimacy of it as long as it's not done unethically or that kind of thing. And we have to, at the very least, give God some of the same consideration. That him being outside of eternity, outside of time, him being the perfect judge, can look at a situation and know exactly what should be done. He must not be judged by us who have no concept of where his perspective is from. Yeah. That's true. It's not the soul being punished. When you're talking about when we do punishment here? Yeah. We're not punishing the soul. That's true. And there is a lot of, there's a big topic, I realize that. But when you have a God who kills 3,000 people because they've disobeyed him, that shows you how seriously he takes his word, and how important it is that we conform to his ideas. And that's something that's not, it sounds strange to say, but most of the religious world doesn't teach that. They teach it doesn't matter what you do as long as you love God. And the overwhelming majority of the message in the Bible is God loves you, therefore you must transform into what he expects. And we approach God on his terms. And we emphasize that a lot here. And it's not looking for perfection, it's looking for faithfulness. So it says a lot about his character, maybe even more than we can realize and say out loud. How do the sacrificial offerings provide a means for a holy God to dwell among his people? What do they teach about approaching God? So this is related to the giving from their means, so that they can have the ability to build the tabernacle and all these different things. What does that say? Remember, first of all, when he asked for donations to be made by tribe, why did he tell them to stop? Right. It was overwhelming. We have more than we need, so stop giving. So this came incidentally after God's punishment of the 3,000. They learned some kind of a lesson from that, because then they're very generous with God. They're recognizing, we need to treat him with respect and dignity and honor. And so they're giving and giving and giving, and so much so that Moses says, you need to stop, right? What does that say about how we approach God? Those things were given for what purpose? Yes, so that there can be a place for God's dwelling, so to speak. That's what it was all designed to do. And that says something, the giving of those materials says something about us and how we approach God. And the expectation that he has is that we're giving out of our own selves. We're giving of ourselves in love so that he will have more of a dwelling place with us. I think that's something we can get from it. But we'll try to start with that one on Wednesday. Thanks for the good discussion.